characters for facial animation in Maya can be a challenge. Join me as I demystify the process of facial rigging for a character in Maya. We're going to start off with facial topology and then move on to creating our own blend shapes. We're going to add joints to our character's head and then connect everything up with spline-based controllers that allow animators to seamlessly manipulate your character's face. So let's go ahead and get started with facial rigging in Maya. If you have access to the exercise files that accompany this course and want to follow along, go ahead and download those now and place the exercise files folder on your desktop. Now that folder contains a Maya project. So go ahead in Maya and set your project to this folder. And it contains all of the assets that we need to finish the course. Now, all of these are contained in the scenes folder, and these are all the scene files that we will be using in the course. So if you want to follow along, go ahead and download the exercise files now. The most important thing in a character rig, particularly a facial rig, is the character's geometry. So let's take a look at how this character is modeled and how facial topology is important for a character rig. So I've gone ahead and just put a neutral color on this character so we can see the wires a little bit better. In fact, I'm going to turn on wireframe on shaded. So as you can see, this is actually comprised of multiple pieces of geometry. If we go into our outliner, you'll see that I have a geometry group, and under that I have my head, and then all the other parts of the characters, such as the eyes and the hair and the eyebrows and all that stuff. So we're going to take a look basically at the head model. I'm just going to go ahead and select this parts group and hit Control H to hide it. Now, the facial model itself has a very specific topology. In other words, the wires of this character are organized in a very specific way. Now, this is a typical character, and as you can see, we have three sets of radial outlines. So we have the eyes, which are basically round, and then we have the mouth, which is, again, kind of a radial or circular outline. So when you model these, you want your edge loops to align with that topology. So in this case, if we look at the mouth and we go and right click and go into edge mode, let's say I double click those edges, you'll see that they basically surround the mouth. And this gives me a much easier way of modeling the mouth, and the mouth will deform a little bit more realistically. So if I were to say maybe go into vertex mode and select, say, the corner of the mouth, I'm going to go over to my modeling tools tab here, and let's turn on some soft selection. So when I start to model this, you can see that this is moving fairly naturally. And so as this deforms, you can see it's kind of pushing into the cheek. If I had a little bit more soft selection, I would probably start to move the cheek itself. And you can see how the cheek will deform fairly naturally. Now, the same goes for, say, the lower part of the face. So if I were to, say, select these vertices here, you could see that this radial topology works as well. So if I were to say to switch this over to surface mode and were to move these down, you can see I can get a fairly realistic deformation. Now, again, the same works for the eyes. You're going to have your eyelids and your lower and upper part of the eyes and brows. Again, you want those to be modeled along the lines of force that the face will move. Now, in addition to all of this, you do want to make sure that you have enough detail in your model to deform the face exactly the way that you want, but not so much detail that it's difficult. So in this particular case, if I hit the 1 key, you'll see that this is my basic topology. I would call this about a medium resolution, maybe even on the low side. But when I smooth this, you can see that it gets a pretty good effect. Now, it depends on your model. If you have a lot more detail, you may need to model that in, or you might be able to do that with textures and displacement maps. Now, before you actually get down to rigging, you'll want to do a few things to your model just to make sure that we start off on the right foot. And that means doing things such as naming everything properly, setting up some layers, deleting history, and so on. So the first thing you want to do is just organize the geometry that you do have in the scene. So in this case, if we go into our outliner, you'll see I've actually done a little bit of this work up front. So if I select my head here, you'll see it's under this geometry group. So in this particular group, I have all the geometry in the scene. So I have my head under that main level, and then I have a second group for all the parts of the character. So that means things like the eyes, the hair, which I've modeled separately. I've also modeled the brows separately because this is more of a cartoony character. And then also I have top and bottom teeth, which you can't see, but if I turn this into wireframe mode, you can probably see them. Now, I've basically just organized these and given them descriptive name. Now, that's probably something you would have done while modeling these objects, but if not, go ahead and just organize it now. Now, the next thing you want to do is just get rid of all your history. So let's go ahead and select all the objects and go Edit, Delete All by Type, History. That should get rid of all the history. And then we should probably zero out the transform. So let's go ahead and select all of these objects, go modify, freeze transformations, just get everything kind of all organized and aligned. Now, if you have objects that may rotate, you may want to make sure that you set your pivots, although in this particular character, everything's going to be manipulated by joints, so it's not going to be as big of a problem. But if you need to rotate things around specific axes, you'll want to center your pivots at this point. So for example, for these eyes, I can shift select both of these and do modify center pivot. So those are centered to the eyes. The head and the hair and all that stuff probably doesn't need to be modified too much because it will be deformed either by blend shapes or joints. Now, finally, you'll probably want to set up some layers as well. So we can go over to the Layers tab here, and we can create a layer for these objects. So I'm going to, again, select all my geometry. I'm going to create a layer from Selected. Double click on that. Let's just go ahead and name that Geometry. We can also set up layers that we'll be using in the future. So I'm going to create an empty layer. Let's call that, say, rig. So that will be basically all the rigging controls that we will be using. We can also create a new layer and call it, say, shapes, because we're going to be having some blend shapes. And maybe one more for the joints for the skeletal deformation. Now, once you have all these, you may want to rearrange the order of this list. I like to have my geometry towards the top. And then I typically like to put the rig at the very top because that's what I'm going to be using to actually animate the character. So all these ones down here, you're not actually going to be touching those when you go to animate. So the geometry, joints, and shapes, those can be a little bit further down on the list, but the rig should be at the top. So go ahead and get your scene all organized and we'll go from there. We're going to start off the rigging process by modeling some blend shapes. I find blend shapes to be probably the most important part of the character rig. If you get these right, you're a really good long way towards having a successful rig. Now, blend shapes are sculptural. So I have this model. We want to create individual shapes that manipulate just a portion of the face. Let me show you what I mean here. Now, if I go over to my layers panel, you'll see I have shapes hidden. Let's go ahead and make those visible. And when I zoom out, you'll see I have a whole bunch of shapes. Now, these are the shapes that we will be modeling throughout this course. So let's take a look at what we're attempting to do here. So if I go up here to the very top two rows, you'll see I have a bunch of different versions of that character, and the shapes are all slightly different. So this one has the right top eyelid all the way down. This one has the right top eyelid halfway down, and so on and so forth. So just for the eyelids, I'm going to need to create 8 different shapes. Now we have the same for the corners of the mouth. So here I have the right smile. And as you can see, this is sculptural. So this is pushed up. The cheek is affected. And it is as if that character is just pulling this part of the face up into a smile. We have the corresponding shape for the left side. We also have a frown on either side. Now, we also have the condition where the character's mouth is being spread laterally or horizontally. So we have a lip wide and then a lip narrow. So, for example, if he's pursing his lips. So, again, this creates another 8 shapes just for the general shape of the corners of the mouth. So, in addition to this, we can model more shapes. In this case, I'm going to model shapes for the lips. So, for example, I've got the middle of the lip kind of being pulled down. So, for example, if you want the character to be afraid, that's probably what you would pull down. We also have the lips up on the left and right to create more of a sneer. And then we've also created the center of the lips up and down so that he can make an ooh shape or whistle or do something like that. So again, these are just individual shapes that only affect those vertices that are connected to that very isolated movement. Now, these are a pretty good selection of shapes, but again, depending on your character, you may want to model more or less shapes. Just depends on your character. So now that we understand where we're going, let's go ahead and start modeling those shapes. Let's go ahead and start modeling some blend shapes. We're going to start with the corners of the mouth. Now, before I model anything, I want to protect my neutral shape here. So if I select my head here, you'll see it's head neutral. And I've already zeroed out my transforms. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and just do a freeze transforms. And I'm going to select this and just move this over to the side here. So now that I've moved it over, I'm going to duplicate it. So I'm going to go Edit Duplicate, or you can hit Control D. And now I have a second copy of this. And because everything was zeroed out, all I have to do is type in 0 into my Translate X. And now I'm working on a copy of my master. And again, this protects my neutral. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this. Let's go ahead and call this head smile. So now that we have this, we can start to model. Now, when I model, I want to model symmetrically. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my modeling toolkit here. And let's turn on symmetry for object X and go into vertex mode. And as you can see, when I select one side, it selects the other. Now, we are going to be modeling symmetrical shapes, and it makes sense to actually model them at the same time. So if I always have symmetry turned on, hopefully everything will model properly. So what we want to do is we want to create the smile shape. So I'm going to select, say, some of these vertices here. And for this particular part of the mouth, you do want to make sure you turn on soft select. Now, it depends on your model as to how much you want this to move, but you also want to make sure that instead of volume, you turn on surface. So if I have volume turned on and I select, say, this part of the lip, it's going to select the upper lip as well, and I don't want that. I want it to go along the surface of the model. So this way, when I select the upper lip, it doesn't affect the lower lip at all, unless it's kind of close to the corner of the mouth here where they kind of converge. So I'm going to select a couple of these vertices. And what we want to do is just start modeling. So I want to model what the character looks like when he is just smiling. So we can start to move these vertices up and into the corner there. If I want to, I can expand my vertices to get a little bit more. And as you can see, we're kind of pushing that up into the cheeks. But I'm also getting a little bit of movement here. You can kind of see the teeth poking through, and I don't really want that. Now, I want to keep this very, very contained so that it's really just moving that portion of the mouth that I want to move. So for the corner of the mouth, we can do that, but we also can stretch this a little bit so I can start to expand. Now, you also have to remember the volume of the character. So as it's moving up and out, it will also move back a little bit. And it will also tend to puff out the cheeks just a little bit. So we can actually push those cheeks up. So again, what we're trying to do is just get those corners of the mouth into the right position. Now, this is just going to be a sculptural problem, so we're going to have a lot of back and forth with this. So I'm going to go ahead and tweak these a little bit, and then we'll come back. Now, I've gone ahead and tweaked my smile shape, and this is what I came up with. Now, when you create blend shapes, you do want to be consistently testing them against your neutral model, just to make sure that everything is working properly. So we can do that very easily. Now, I have my neutral here, but I'm going to want to protect it even more than I have. So I'm going to go ahead and select that neutral model, and then just go ahead and duplicate it. And then let's go ahead and hide that duplicate. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit Control H. So now I have a copy of this. And let's go ahead and move this one over. And we can now basically apply the blend shape to this copy to make sure that everything works. So I'm going to go ahead and select my smile shape first. You select your blend shapes first, your target last. So I'm going to shift select that neutral shape. Let's go into our rigging menu, go deform blend shape. Now, when I have that, you'll see in the channel box, I should have a blend shape node here. An easier way to see it is to go into animation editors, shape editor. And so there's my shape. And if I go and select that lip smile, you can see that now it's giving me that smile. And it's also affecting the cheeks. And it seems to work fairly well. Now, this is just one shape. Obviously, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of shapes. Now, I don't need to show you how to do all of these. They're basically just modeling tasks. But I have modeled some of the other shapes for the corners of the mouth. So if we go into our layers menu and unhide those, you'll see that I have three other shapes. One is for frown. That's the corners of the mouth down. One is called purse, which is the corners of the mouth in to create kind of a ooh or an O shape, purse the lips. And the other one is the lips wide, so pull the corners of the lips horizontally. Now, if we want, we can use these to test all of the shapes. Now, I've already modeled these, but let's go ahead and test them out. So I'm going to go ahead and shift select all of these, stay in the shape editor, and then select this blend shape one, right click, add selection as target. So that adds in all of the other shapes. And now I can try out my frown. I can purse the lips. I can widen the lips. And we can also start to manipulate these so that they all go together. Now, if for some reason you don't like the way that these are moving together, you can always go and remodel the shapes. So, for example, if I don't quite like the way this smile is working, I can right click on it, select these vertices, and move them around. And you can see that because I haven't deleted history, everything is still live on the model. So if I maybe bring up my soft select a little bit, you can see this a little bit better. So now I can, again, just manipulate and tweak these shapes so that they all work together. Now, once you've done all that, you should keep your model organized. So I'm going to go ahead and go back in object mode here. Now, this neutral, I want to go ahead and set that back to 0. So let's go back into our shape editor, make sure everything is zeroed out. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete history on that. So now I have a neutral that I can use for additional models. And then for all of these, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I select them all. Let's go ahead and make sure they're in the shape layer. So I'm going to go over to my layers and we're going to make sure we add selected objects. There we go. And then in the outliner, we're going to start building a library of these. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of my shapes, hit Control G to group them. And we're going to call this, say, shapes group. So now I've got a group with all of those shapes in it. And then let's go ahead and reset this for the next model. So I'm going to go ahead and select this head here, move it over a little bit, and then let's zero out that copy of the neutral that we can play with. So now I've got this all set up, and we can start to model additional shapes. In addition to the corners of the mouth, you'll probably want to create some additional lip shapes to give you more control over the shape of the character's mouth. Now, I've gone ahead and modeled these, so let's just take a look at them, and then I'll give you some hints as to how to model them. So I'm going to unhide my shapes layer. You'll see here on this lower row that I have some of these shapes. So if we go from this side, you'll see I have basically a sneer. So kind of the left and right side of that lip kind of being pulled up along the nose. I have one that pulls up along the center. So if the character is whistling or saying the letters ooh. Same for the lower lip. I've got one for the center of the lower lip as well as those lower corners. Now, again, when we model these, we will be modeling symmetrically, and you want to make sure that you follow the lines of force of the muscles of the mouth. So, for example, if I go into this face here and we select some vertices, let's go into our modeling toolkit. We want to make sure that we're symmetrical along object X. And then let's go ahead and select the corners here. So I'm going to do a soft select, make sure I'm on surface. And the real issue here is that you want to make sure that you're not touching these center ones. So if I were to pull this down right now, you'll see that these center ones are getting moved slightly. So we are doing left and right shapes, and we are doing a center shape. So typically for this, what you want is you want this one to be completely untouched, and then somewhere around here or here, so either this edge loop or this edge loop, is where it starts to get pulled into this other shape. So for this one, I might select these ones here. Keep my soft select fairly low, say for this particular model, maybe 0.5 or 0.75, so you can see that this center one is completely untouched. And then just start pulling. And what you want to do is, again, just start modeling this into shape. Maybe start selecting more vertices as you pull. And remember, when you pull, you're not just pulling along two axes, that this actually pulls along the surface of the face. So as you pull up and down and left and right, you may have to go back and forth to get that to match up with how it would work anatomically. So there are the beginnings of that particular shape. Now we can go through and model all of the shapes, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to actually kind of undo my way out of this. And let's just go ahead and take a look at what the final shapes should look like. So I'm going to go ahead and select these and then shift select my head. And let's go ahead and do a deform by blend shape. And we'll take a look at our animation editor shape editor and see how these work. So the lips low center go like that. Now when I do the lips lower corner, they should come down, and the real trick here is you want to make sure that this is fairly flat towards the bottom. So when these come all the way up, that you get a pretty even motion here. Now, the problem with this is that if these shapes are a little bit off, you may get a dip or a bump somewhere in between the extremes of these two shapes, and that's not what you want. And the same for the top lip. You want to make sure that these shapes don't affect the middle part and that the middle part doesn't affect these outer shapes here. So you can see I've got a little bit of an error here on this side. So one of the things we can do is we can go back to our original shapes and edit them. So I'm going to go into, say, my front view. And let's go ahead and select one of these shapes here, go into vertex mode. And I'm going to zoom in here so we can see this. So you can see that some of that is a little bit off. And so if you need to fix something like this, I'm going to turn off soft select. You can actually start to manipulate it here, you can see that it's actually manipulating that final shape. So again, what I can do is I can combine them into a blend shape and use that blend shape as a way to fine tune the shapes so that they all work together. So go ahead and model your shapes and we'll come back and do some more. With the lip shapes in place, we can move on to the upper part of the face. So we're going to concentrate on blinking the character. We're going to work with the eyes and the eyelids. So with this character, the eyes actually are separate objects. So I'm going to shift select those and make a separate layer for them. So I'm going to hop over to the layers panel, go create layer from selected, double click on that, and let's just name that eyes. And the reason I'm doing that is that I can template it or reference it and not accidentally select this part of the model. So let's go ahead and template it so we can see our model itself. And with our model, we want to make sure that we have enough edge loops to model the blink. And I've got plenty of edge loops in here, so we can do that. And then we also want to make sure we understand where that midpoint of the blink is. So I'm going to turn on wireframe on shaded, and you can see the middle of the eye runs along here. So somewhere in the range of these two edge loops will be my midpoint. I'm going to go back to template mode and let's start modeling. Now, when we model, we want to make sure that we do model symmetrically. So I'm going to model along object X, and then I may need soft selection as I do this. Now, with this type of modeling, I do like to take it basically an edge loop or a pair of edge loops at a time. Now, for this first loop, I'm actually going to work with pairs because I want to keep the distance between these two edge loops fairly constant. So I'm going to actually do this in face mode. So I'm going to go ahead and select this face, shift, double click that face, and now I've selected these faces here. And so I'm going to start moving those down. And one of the nice things about this is that I can also rotate them. So I'm going to rotate them a little bit out. Let's go ahead and see how they work with the eye, and then go ahead and literally just pull them straight out. And as you can see, I'm getting kind of a nice curve that will help me when I do my final modeling here. So again, I'm just trying to pull these down so that I'm getting kind of a straight line here all the way across. So again, I'm just shift selecting these a face at a time and kind of moving them into place. Now you are going to get some interpenetration here, and that's because we only have one set of edge loops. So at this point, I'll probably go over to vertex mode and then just kind of eyeball this so that it's fairly flat. And then I'm going to pull this out so that this is pretty much right at the edge of that eyeball. So we want it fairly close fitting to the eyeball, and we want to kind of flatten this out. Now, I could spend a lot of time on this, so obviously you get this portion of the modeling job. Now, at the corners here, I'm going to basically slide these down a little bit because I'm not quite on the center of my eye. And then let's go ahead and select all of these and move those down. Now, again, you're seeing I'm getting kind of this interpenetration here, but that's because we need more detail. And so one of the other ways you can kind of start to model this is to use some of your mesh tools. I really like Slide Edge is a really good one to use in this particular situation. So if we go into Mesh Tools, Slide Edge, you can middle click and drag, and that edge will just slide right along the other edge loops. And then I can move those out. And as you can see, it's a very quick way to get this additional detail in. So again, I'm going to just go to my history, do slide edge, slide that down a little bit more. We can select these as well. And then again, slide edge. And this puts the edge loops kind of in the right place, but we still need to move them out, model, and tweak. So again, for this particular one, those corners are a little sharp, so I kind of want to soften those up and so on. But hopefully you get the idea and have a good workflow for tweaking these models. And as you notice, I've also modeled this symmetrically, and that will be important because we want this left and right shapes to be symmetrical. I've gone ahead and modeled both my upper and lower eyelids. So if we reveal the shape layers, you'll see I placed them up here on the top. So let's go ahead and take a look at how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of these shapes and then shift select my neutral head and add in the blend shape. So let's go into our shape editor and see how this works. So if I dial this one down, you'll see my upper lids close and my lower lids do as well. And I get a pretty good distribution of the geometry and it looks pretty good. Now the problem with this is that you'll notice about halfway through each eyelid, you'll notice that we're getting this breakup right here. You can kind of see it, and there it is. And that's because of the way that blend shape works. Now, blend shape is a linear tool. It just moves vertices from one point to another along a line. But if I go into my side view here, so let's go into, say, a right view. I'm going to go ahead and hide these shapes here so we can see this a little bit more clearly. You'll see that as this upper eyelid deforms, it's moving along a straight line from this point to this point. But about halfway through that, you'll see that the curve of this eyeball is basically above that straight line. So what we need to do is create what's called an in-between or an intermediate shape in order to correct for this. So the easiest way to do this is to just model on the blend shape itself. So before I do this, I'm actually going to go ahead and select my head and hit Control D and duplicate it. And so that duplicates a neutral version of that head. And that's because in the shape editor, I had everything set to 0. Okay, so now I have a clean version of the head here, and I'm going to model on this one. So again, I'm going to turn on my modeling toolkit, make sure I have symmetry turned on, and I'm going to template this eye, template the eye layer. And so let's go ahead and move these upper eyelids up to about 0.5 or so, and then start to model. So as you can see, these are behind this geometry. So I'm just going to go ahead and select these and start to move them forward. It's really just a couple of vertices that we need to tweak here. And so what you can do is now that we turn on full rendering here, you can see that now at the midpoint, I've got this going out. So that's going to be my middle pose. So let's go in object mode here, and you can see that I've done this symmetrically, so it works for both eyes here. Let's turn on our shapes. And I'm just going to select this shape here, move it over, and let's go ahead and delete history. So now that's clean. This one here is my copy or my backup. I'm going to zero that out so it's in the right place. So now what we want to do is we want to add this one as an in-between. So all we have to do is set up our blend shape as we did before. So I'm going to go Deform, Blend Shape, go back into my shape editor. Now this is where we do this. So let's arrange this here. So as you can see, when this gets to about 50%, I'm still getting exactly the same thing I had before. That's because it's exactly the same. Well, what I can do is I can select this secondary one. Let's go ahead and rename that head up lids. Let's just call it head up lids 2. Okay. And so I'm going to go ahead and keep that selected, go into my shape editor, highlight the original lid, right click, add selection as in between target. So now you can see it's got that target there. And I'm going to say that that target takes effect at 0.5. So now you can see this little red line moves over, and that's where that in-between shape will take effect. So right there, it's now that in-between shape. And right here, it's the actual shape. So now I don't get that eyelid moving through the eye. It actually moves over a reasonable approximation of a curve. So it's essentially moves enough so that you don't notice it's moving in straight lines. So you can do this for any number of different types of shapes. And so if you need a shape that has to move or animate along a curve, you may need to create in-between shapes. At this point, we have quite a number of blend shapes that we've created. Now, these blend shapes are great, but they're also symmetrical, and that's because we modeled them that way. But we want to actually separate these out into right and left shapes. Now, we can do that simply by using the shape editor and the component editor. So let's keep this pretty simple here. I'm going to go into my outliner first. And under geometry, I do have a backup of this head called head neutral. And so I want to make sure I have a backup of my original neutral geometry just in case. And then I'm going to hit Control H over this parts group, and we just want to hide that part of the character. Now I'm going to keep this very simple by just doing one shape, and I'm going to show you how that works, and then you can expand that to all the different shapes. So I'm going to select this shape here. Let's go ahead and do lips frown, select my neutral, and then just do a blend shape. Now if I go into my shape editor, you'll see that my blend shape works on both sides of the face. But I want to be able to separate that out. I can do that using what's called the component editor. Now I'm actually going to go into my front view here because it's going to be easier to select things, and I'm going to go ahead and position that neutral head. And then I'm going to go into Windows, General Editors, Component Editor. Now the component editor basically can give you a vertex by vertex breakdown as to what is affected by what. So if we went into smooth skins, you could basically go joint by joint as to what's affecting this. We also have a tab called Blend Shape Deformers, and let's go ahead and see how that is affecting our vertices. So if I select my neutral head, right-click over it, and go Vertex, if I select some vertices, you'll see that these vertices are affected by that one frown shape. And then I also have this master shape called Blend Shape 1, which is essentially just the overall blending of all of these. So I really just want to work with this particular column. So what I want to do is select all the vertices on one side. So let's go ahead and select the vertices on the right side of the character. Now I want to make sure I have symmetry and soft select turned off when I do this. And you'll see that all of these are at 1. Well, if I scroll down and select all of these and set them to 0, watch what happens. When I turn my lips frown all the way up, well, these are no longer affected. And so my frown is now a left-sided frown. Now, one of the problems is that we still have these vertices along the middle. So if I click this one, shift, double click the one below it, you'll see I get this ring through the middle. And all of these are affected by a factor of 1. So if I were to separate these out, I would have to have these center ones affected halfway. And so all I have to do is select all of these and put them to 0.5. Now, if I do that, I can basically duplicate it, and now I have a left-sided frown. Now I can do the same for the other side. In this case, though, I have all of these vertices. Some are half and some are at 1, some are at 0. So I'm just going to go ahead and put everything back to 1 and then just do the opposite. So now this is basically both sides. So I'm going to do the opposite side. go to my component editor, shift select all these, make them 0. There we go. And now select this one, double click, and all of these go to 0.5. So now I can duplicate this one, and I've got the other side. So let's go back into our shape editor here. Let's go ahead and delete that target. Goes back to neutral. So now I can select this and this, create blend shape, and now I have a left and right. Well, these are named wrong, but as you can see, I've got a left and a right shape that I can work individually. Now, I just did this with one set of shapes, but you can do it for all of your shapes and create left and right versions of each of these. Now, you can do them one at a time, or you can add all the blend shapes in and then just individually dial them up and snapshot out all the left, and then reverse that for all of the right. Now I've gone ahead and created all of my left and right shapes, and the only two exceptions were these two shapes here for the mouths, where I have basically the lips moving along the center axis. I didn't need to do a left and right for those particular shapes. So now with all of these in place, we should be able to wire up our blend shapes into our head. Now, the one problem with this is that we don't want to add in our intermediate eyelid shapes right away. We're going to add those later. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and select all of my shapes except for those intermediate eyelid shapes, which would be these 4. And then select my head, blend shape. So now let's go into our shape editor. You can see I've got my lips lower center, purse right. Now, one of the things about this is that you kind of are selecting these somewhat randomly. And so you can rearrange these to make them a little bit easier to understand in the shape editor. So for example, this lip purse right is way up here and lip purse left is down. So all I have to do is left click and drag that, and you can basically start to rearrange these. So typically I'll put the eyes on one side and then the lips on the other. I'll probably keep all the frowns and smiles together, the wide left and rights together, and so on. So I've got purse left and right, wide frown and smile. That works. And then I've got upper corner of the lips and lower corner of the lips. And again, I'm just rearranging these so that they're kind of all in a reasonably logical order. So now I've got, basically like similar controls in similar places. Now we still have the eyelids though. And so I have my eyelids lower and upper, but I don't have my in-between shapes. I purposely left those out because we're going to add those right now. So let's go through this. So let's start up here at the top left corner here. So I've got my upper right lid here. So that's this one here. And so I want to make sure I have my second shape selected. Right click, add selection as in between, make that middle point 0.5, and there we go. So there's the other upper lid. Select that one. Add selection as in between target. Put the target to 0.5. And so hopefully both of these upper lids should work now. There we go. That works. That works. Awesome. And let's do the same for the lower lid. So lower lid right. Add selection as in between. Make that 0.5. And then lower lid A You can even turn this to 0.5 if you want. And if you add it while it's at 0.5, it'll automatically put that in. So now these should work. So my lower lids and my upper lids all work. And so now I've got all of my blend shapes connected up, and my character is now ready for the next step, which is to add joints and skinning. So at this point, we have our blend shapes in place. And so if we take a look under Windows, Animation Editor, Shape Editor, you should see all the blend shapes that we created. And we have quite a few. We have some for the eyelids. We have some to move the lips, and some to do things such as smile and frown. So all of these are basically sculptural shapes. Now we're going to move on to adding joints to this character and doing skinning. Now, where you place the joints kind of depends on how you want to approach the character. Typically, I like to use joints for the larger, broader body and skeletal movements. So I'll certainly do joints to move the head around as well as the jaw, because those are skeletal joints. Now, you can also use joints and skinning to move parts of the face. Some people do use them for the eyelids, and I'm going to use them for the brows. So we'll place some joints up here. You could also use joints to move other parts of the face. So we're also going to add in some for the cheeks as well. Now, whether or not you use joints will depend kind of on how you want to rig the character itself, and so on. So a lot of this is I'm showing you techniques that you can use on your own characters, and you can pick and choose what techniques you want to use at any given point. So let's go ahead and get going with actually adding the joints and skinning the character. Now let's go ahead and start drawing some joints. We're going to start with the main joints for the head, and that would be the neck and the skull. Now these will be symmetrical. We will draw them down the center, and this character is centered along the x-axis. So the easiest way to do it is to draw in the side view, and that way anything we draw will be centered properly. And we can also kind of see how this aligns anatomically. So I'm going to go ahead into my rigging menu set, and let's go ahead and do create joints. So I want the base of my neck to be basically down here. Now, if you already have a body for your character, you may have to align it to whatever joints you have. So it's basically going to be the top of the spine. But here I have a little bit more freedom. Now remember, the neck and the spine go along the back side of the body. So the front of this neck here is going to contain the throat. So we do want to kind of err on the side of the back of the body. So let's go ahead and put one joint here. And then I want my head to swivel around an axis somewhere in this range here. So I'm going to go ahead and place a joint there. And then the next joint that we're going to create is going to be for the skull. Now, this one, I want to try and make sure that it's vertical. It will help a little bit more with rigging. And I'm going to place it somewhere around the ear. And that's because this joint here is going to be used as a connection for additional joints in the eyes and the jaw. And then I'm going to create one more kind of towards the top of the head. And the orientation of that is not nearly as critical. So now I've got a series of joints that look like this. So this is the neck, connects to the spine of the character. This is the most important one because this is going to be where the head rotates. So if this is off, you will want to adjust it. And the reason I drew it fairly vertically is so that way it'll align fairly cleanly to whatever controls I add. Now, this joint here will not be animated. It is kind of more of a connection. So I kind of place that additional joint in there just so we have a place to connect other things. So once we have this in place, we can start to name them. So I can call this one here joint neck. Call this one joint head 1, joint head 2, and joint head 3. Now, once you have all these joints in place, always makes a good idea to keep organized. So I'm going to go ahead and right click over my joints layer and add selected objects. So now those are in place. With the head joints in place, we can now move on to the jaw. Now, the jaw is the other major skeletal joint of the head, and typically I like to do this with a joint. So when we create a jaw joint, you do want to make sure that you align it with the jaw of the character. So, if you kind of can feel on your own face, you'll realize that the jaw hinges somewhere in front of the ear, somewhere along here. Now, every character is going to be different, but you do need to place that joint anatomically so that way it deforms properly. So for this character, I'm going to go back into my side view, and I'm going to draw a joint chain. Now I'm going to draw it separately from the joint chain I just drew, and we'll connect it in later. So for this character, the jaw is probably going to be somewhere around here, kind of a little bit below and forward of the ear. So I'm going to go ahead and place it here, just left click. And then the second joint you want to kind of place somewhere around the chin or towards the top of the chin. Now, typically, I like to draw it a little bit outside of the character, and that makes it easy to see when I'm in this mode. And sometimes I like to be able to select this joint. And if you want to see all the joints, you can certainly turn on X-ray joints to see how those are aligned. Now, as with the other joints, we do need to name them. So let's do that in the outliner. So let's call this joint jaw 1. And the second one is basically just going to be called joint jaw 2. Now, these will be connected into this main skeleton. So we want to connect it here under this head 2 connection. So I'm just going to go ahead and left click and middle drag under here. And notice how it draws another little joint. Now, this is just an easy way to connect these. So when I rotate this, all of these joints move together. And that's one reason why I drew this joint in the previous movie, and that's so I have a place to connect all of these joints. Now, with these joints in place, you probably could move on to skinning, but we're going to add a few more joints for the upper part of the face. For this character, we're going to use joints for the upper portion of the character's face. So I need to add in joints to control the brows and the cheek. So this is actually a fairly straightforward process. All we have to do is add in the joints and then connect them into the main skeleton. So I'm going to do this in a front view. So I'm going to actually select my character here, frame it in the front view. So I'm going to do this in a shaded mode, but I have X-ray joints turned on so I can see what I'm drawing. So all we have to do is literally just create a couple of joints, make sure they're positioned, and then hook them in. So let's go ahead and hit Create Joints. We can also do that from Skeleton Create Joints. And I'm basically going to split the difference between this brow object that we have and the top of the eye on the face. So somewhere around here for the first one. Now, I don't want to continually click like this. I don't want to create a joint chain. I want to create individual joints. So I'm going to click once, hit Enter, select the tool again, click again, hit Enter, and then select the tool a third time. So now I've got these joints here, and they're separate. And the reason I'm doing them separately is because I want to connect them into the main head here. So I'm going to go ahead and move these forward. And let's turn off X-ray joints so we can kind of see how they sit on the face. So basically, I want these so that they're pretty much right at the surface of the character's face. So I'm going to move them in so they just interpenetrate just a little bit. So there we go. So now we've got these three here. So joint 1, let's go ahead and rename that joint brow. and that's the inner brow, and it's the left inner brow. So let's go ahead and do that for the other one. So that's our center one, brow, center, left. And then one more, brow, outer, left. So I have inner, center, and outer. That's fairly descriptive. And then we need one for the cheek. So I'm just going to take one of these and hit Control D to duplicate it. And we're going to just position that kind of on the highest point of the cheek. So somewhere around here. So basically where kind of the cheek kind of bulges out. And so obviously that's not going to be called joint brow. It's going to be called joint cheek left. So now that I have all of these, I need to connect them into my main skeleton. Well, let's remember what we're doing here. So I've got this main joint here, head 1, and that's where I'm going to be rotating the head. So that's kind of like the top of the neck, and that's going to be the main axis of rotation. Now this joint here, head 2, is kind of just the one I placed in there so that I can connect everything together. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and select these 4 joints that I just created, middle click and drag them below joint head 2. So now, when I rotate this, they all move together. Now you'll notice a little bit of a difference here. When I drew the jaw, I actually drew a pivot here, and that allows me to pivot that joint. With these, I did not, and that's because we're actually going to manipulate these with translation. So we're going to move them around like this rather than rotating them. And so if you do want to rotate them, then you will need to add in additional joints that allow you to do that. So now that we have all of these in place, all we have to do is mirror the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and just select the base of my hierarchy here. Let's turn on X-ray joints so we can see what we have. You can see I've got all of my joints there. And then let's go skeleton, mirror joints. And we're going to go ahead and mirror those over the XZ axis. We're going to mirror orientation, and I'm going to search for left, replace it with right. And we're going to go ahead and mirror that. Now what this does is it actually does mirror the joints, but it also makes a copy of all of these joints. So I'm going to go down here, select these 4 in this other hierarchy, middle click and drag them up into my other hierarchy here. And so now everything should be below head 2. I can select this copy and delete it. So now all of my joints are in this one hierarchy, and I'm ready to skin. With our joints in place, we can now add our skin modifier to bind the geometry to the joints. Now, before I do this, I just want to hide some of the geometry that we're not going to be using. I am only going to be working with just the head, so we're not going to worry about the hair or the eyebrows or anything like that at the moment. So let's go into Outliner, and then under your geometry group, you should see a group called Parts, which is everything else. So let's just select that group and hit Control H to hide. Now that those are hidden, we can skin this head to our geometry. So I'm going to turn on X-ray joints, and that'll allow me to see the joints. And I'm going to select the root of all these joints, and they should all highlight. And then select the geometry. And then from our rigging menu, we're going to do skin, bind, skin. I'm using the defaults, and let's just bind. So now that we have that, we should have some deformation. So if I select the joint called joint head 1, I should be able to move the head, and we're getting a reasonable deformation here. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to create a little animation that will help me with the skinning process. So from my animation menu, I'm just going to keep joint head 1 selected and do a set key. And then we can just hit the letter S to set another key at frame 10. Let's go out to, say, frame 40, rotate that head back, set another key, and maybe to 70, and rotate it forward and set another key. So what this does is it basically just moves the head when I scrub the timeline, and it'll make it much easier to see how the deformation is working because I won't have to deselect everything and go reselect the joints and that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and select my geometry again. Let's go back to skin, paint skin weights. So let's take a look at how these joints are working. Well, the first thing I notice is that this joint head 1, which is supposed to affect just mostly everything, is only affecting the back portion of the head. And that's not really what I want. I want it to affect almost all of the head, and then we're going to paint in the exceptions. So for this particular joint, I just want to flood all the values with this, and then we will paint in the other joints later. This makes it much easier to do. So I'm going to keep this joint selected in my paint skin weights. So for paint operation, I want to do replace. Let's keep opacity and value at 1, and then hit flood. And so that floods everything with the value of 1. So all vertices are now attached to this one joint. Well, of course, that's not what we want, but now we have a good starting point. So I'm going to go up here and select my joint neck. And now we can start to paint. So again, I'm going to be in replace mode with a value of 1. And then I can just start painting in those weights. And when I do, you can see how now they stick. And so I just want to get these weights to a reasonable value so that this portion of the head deforms the way that we want. Especially the back of the head there. So now you see I'm starting to get a little bit more reasonable deformation here. So one of the things I'm seeing here is I'm seeing that this is a little bit off, but I can just paint that. And one of the nice things about this is that you can paint while it's deformed, and it will continue to work. So in other words, the back of that neck still needs to be attached to that one joint. So as you can see, we're starting to get a bit of deformation that we want between the head and the neck. Now we do need to create a smoother transition between these joints. So we can use the smooth operation to do that. So if I select smooth and then just run the brush, say, over that border, it'll tend to smooth it out. Now another way to do this is to simply flood with smooth. So I'm going to make sure it's on smooth and then hit flood and watch what happens. It just kind of smooths everything out. And it gives me a fairly smooth transition. Now I can hit this more than once if it's not enough, and I can continue to paint and adjust vertices as needed. So go ahead and get your head to neck transition painted the way that you want, and we'll move on to other parts of the character. We now have our head and neck skinned properly, and if you can scrub the animation, you can see that we've got a pretty good deformation. So let's go ahead and delete that animation and start working on the jaw. So I'm going to turn on X-ray joints, select that joint head 1, shift select those keys and delete them. Now let's go ahead and add animation for the jaw. So I'm going to hit the letter S to set a key at 0, another key at 10, and we're working on joint jaw 1. So I want to rotate that down maybe about 20, 25 degrees, something like that. So I want to open and close the jaw. So let's go ahead and close it. I'm going to 0 out, rotate Z. So now we've got that. And this jaw does rotate left and right as well. So let's go ahead a little bit further out and rotate it maybe about 10, 15 degrees to one side and 10, 15 degrees to the other side. So now we've got up and down, left and right. So now that we have this, let's go and start painting skin weights. I'm going to turn off X-ray joints, select my mesh. Under skin, paint skin weights. So we're working with joint jaw 1. And when you start off, at this point, there are no weights. So this joint doesn't do anything. So let's go ahead and paint in some additional weights. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure we're in paint mode, replace, opacity and value at 1. And then I'm going to make my brush pretty big. And let's just start painting in those weights. So I want to paint basically the areas that are affected by the jaw. Now, we probably have a demarcation line right around here, right around that corner of the mouth. You don't want to go too far above that. That's kind of where it will start to fade out. So anything below this should be pretty much affected by the jaw. Anything above it will be faded out. So right now, you can see I'm starting to get some action here. And one of the things I like to do is I like to work on one side of the character and then mirror over to the other. It's faster and more accurate. So right now I've kind of been painting on the left side of the character, which is my typical way of working. And if we go into skin, we can mirror those weights over to the right side. So if I go into skin, mirror skin weights, you can see that we're mirroring across the vertical YZ axis and positive to negative. So positive, negative will be left to right. So if we press mirror, you can see that those weights copy over. And it's a much faster way to go, and it also keeps things very symmetrical. Now, another problem with something like the jaw and the mouth is that getting these lips exactly the way you want them can be problematic. Now I'm going to hit the 1 key on the keyboard to go into unsmooth. And you can see that we could start to paint this out and start to paint the lips so that they start to come apart. But an easier way to do this is just to use what's called the component editor. So I'm going to close Paint Skin Weights and then select my geometry, right click, and go into vertex mode. And I'm just going to select these vertices on the lower lip. So something like that. And then I'm just going to hit the greater than sign once or twice to expand that selection. Now we can see exactly how these vertices are affected using what's called the component editor. So if we go into Windows, General Editors, Component Editor, you'll see that these are affected by the head and the jaw joints. So joint jaw 1 is the one that we are animating, and that's the one that we want to have affected. So all we need to do is select all of these, and we want those 100% affected by that joint. So I'm going to type in the number 1, hit enter, and look at how that works. So now those are all completely affected by that joint. So now, once I have this, I've kind of gotten around that obstacle. So I can deselect those vertices, right click, go back into object mode, double click on Paint Skin Weights, and now I can continue to paint my weights. So if I wanted to, I could say smooth this a little bit. That'll go ahead and smooth it out. And I can continue to paint. So if I wanted to, I could replace values. I can continue to mirror values if I need to, and generally adjust and tweak the weighting of these vertices. Now, this is kind of a back and forth process. It does take a little bit of time. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the weighting of this, and I hope you will as well. And then we'll come back and do some more. I've gone ahead and finished the weighting for the jaw. And as you can see, it's in pretty good shape. So let's go ahead and delete that animation and move on to these joints on the upper part of the face. So I'm going to turn on X-ray joints, select joint jaw 1, and then right click and delete those keys. Now I'm just going to work on the left side of the face and mirror it over to the right. So for each of these, we want to create a little animation. Now, I'm planning to animate these using translation rather than rotation. Now, the animation I create, it will be translation. So let's go ahead and select the cheek, set a key for that. And then I'm going to go say maybe to frame 30 or 40 here. And let's just go ahead and move that up. And make sure we have a key set for that. I'm going to go ahead and then move that down a little bit and set a key for that. So basically the motion that we're going to be working with is this and this. And then we can also do the same for the brows. So I'm going to select all of these, set a key. Again, I like to keep a buffer between 0 and 10. It just makes it easier to scrub. And then just go ahead and move those up. Maybe move them back down. And then if we want, we could do something. Could do something where one of these goes up and the other ones don't. So we can, again, make something like a shape or something like that. So just a little bit of motion just to see how everything is working together. So let's go ahead and start painting weights. So I'm going to select my geometry, skin, paint skin weights. So this particular joint is called joint cheek left. If I select it, you'll see it highlights in blue. And we want to paint some weight on this. So I'm going to start with replace. And again, I'm just going to keep my values at 1. Maybe make my brush a little bit bigger and just paint right around in there. And then we can also smooth that out, either by flooding or by painting it. So I'm going to flood it once. And now let's see what that looks like. Okay, so that's basically starting to move the cheek. And again, just like with all the other parts of the character, you want to just work your way into it. Take it a bit at a time. Now, one of the things I want to do is make sure that when the cheek comes up, it affects the lower portion of the eye, kind of changes that outline. So I'm going to paint a little more weight up towards here. And again, you can see it's starting to affect it, but we want to make sure that we smooth that out. So I'm going to use my smoothing brush here and maybe even flood smooth once or twice. So now you see when that cheek comes up, it's starting to affect, kind of starting to go into the outline of the eye. So now we've got that. Okay, so this is really, again, just a process that you can play with. If you want to add more, you can. It's really up to you as to how you adjust this. So now, there we go. Okay, so that's pretty good. So now let's go ahead and move up to these brows. Now these brows do have to work together. So we want to make sure that all of these are kind of cooperating and that they move and deform seamlessly. So we're going to be working with, let's start with this one. It's called brow in left, and I'm going to do replace. And again, make this a little bit bigger and maybe smooth it once. Select center. And then select and maybe smooth that. Again, I'm just flood smoothing. And then the outer left. So again, smooth. So now you can see that they're starting to move that, but we're not getting as much effect as we want. So I'm going to actually take this one and use that as kind of my guide here. So let's go back to center. And I want this to kind of go a little bit further up here. Again, let's take in, paint those up a little bit and out. So now what do we got? Yeah. So now you can see we're starting to get a little bit more, but again, this is where we really need to start smoothing this out. There we go. And then outer, flood that. And then inner, flood that. Okay, so now I'm starting to get a little bit more of a little bit more realistic stuff. So again, this is something that you need to really tweak and make sure that it's exactly the way that you want. I'm going to go back into object mode here. And the last thing I want to do is just make sure I mirror my skin weights. So I'm going to go ahead and mirror skin weights. So it goes left to right. And as you can see, we're getting the basis of a good deformation. So go ahead and continue to play with this, and we can start to rig the character. At this point, we have the main skin of the character's head attached to our skeleton. But we have a couple of more parts to our character. So if we go into Outliner, under Geometry, you'll see we have this hidden group called Parts. And if we hit Shift H to unhide it, you'll see that we've got, well, all of this stuff. And all of this stuff still needs to be attached. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to turn on X-ray joints. So you can see that we've got this basic skeleton for the head. And if I select joint head 1, you can see that, well, I've got my head deforming, but all those parts aren't moving along with it. So let's go ahead and start with this hair. Now, I'm not going to really animate or deform this hair. It's pretty much just going to move with the skull. It's far enough above the neck, so it'll pretty much just be rigid. So I'm going to select this joint here, which is called joint head 2. And then shift select the hair, and then all we have to do is a bind skin. Now, the problem with doing this is that, well, we've got a lot of other joints in this skeleton. So if I were to, say, move something like this, it'll actually move the hair as well. So I need to isolate the hair to this one joint, and we can do that using paint weights. So let's go into Skin, Paint Skin Weights, and select Joint Head 2, which is this one. And you can see that it's almost completely white, but if you select any one of these other joints, you'll see that they all have kind of a subtle influence on that hair. So what we want to do is just flood this with this one joint. So I'm going to select Joint Head 2, hit Replace, make sure opacity and value are at 1, flood. You can see how it gets a lot brighter. And now only that joint is affecting the hair. So the hair will only move when that joint moves. So if I select one of these now, nothing happens. So we also have some additional parts of the body. I'm going to actually move on to the eyebrows. And those are a little bit different. So if we take a look at this with wireframe on shaded, you'll see that each of these joints, I'm actually going to turn off X-ray joints here so we can see a little bit better. They move the geometry here, but they don't move the brows. And we want these brows to move along with these joints. So let's go ahead and skin those as well. So I'm going to select 1, 2, 3 joints, all of the brows, and then select the brow itself, and then do a skin, bind skin. Now you can see that this does have an effect, but I will need to fine tune and again, paint weights. Now for this, I actually do want to do some animation here. So I'm going to select this first joint called brow in left. And let's go ahead and just set some keyframes here so that I can tweak my deformation. So let's go do that. And then I'm going to copy that neutral key, paste it in. So it goes up. Now let's do the same for this one. Set a neutral key here at 40. Let's go up to about 50. Bring that up. And then zero that out. So I'm going to copy and paste that other key. So now we've got this one, and let's go ahead and do this one. Again, set a neutral key and then move it up. So as you can see, each one of these is a little bit off. So let's go ahead and select those brows and do a paint skin weights. Now we've got a couple of things affecting this. If you notice, joint head 2 is actually affecting that. We don't want that. So let's start by going into a replace mode, and we're going to select the value at 0, and we'll flood that with joint head 1 at 0. And that should just allow these 3 to affect it. So let's see how that. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to kind of smooth this out a little bit. So I'm going to go into smooth mode, maybe turn my opacity down a little bit, and I'm going to select my brow inner and then just start smoothing that out. And you can see that as I start to smooth, I can actually add more opacity here, that it's starting to smooth that joint. Let's do the outer joint here. See how that has an effect? Okay, now again, we can start to smooth this. So I'm literally just going back and forth trying to smooth this. We can also flood a little bit, and that should smooth it out as well. So really all I want to do is smooth out the deformations so that this brow moves fairly realistically. So you can continue to tweak this, and then you'll have to go over and do the same thing on the other side because these are two separate objects, so you can't mirror them. So this is a place where mirroring doesn't work, so you will have to repeat this on the right side. So go ahead and do that before we return. So now I have the eyebrows and the hair attached, and we need to move on to some other objects. So if I say take my head here and rotate it, you'll see that, okay, I've got my eyebrows in here, but I still have the teeth and the eyes. So let's focus on the teeth. So I'm going to select actually this geometry here and hit Control H to hide it. And that way we can see things a little bit more clearly. Now these teeth are basically just geometry, and we can attach them in one of two ways. We can skin it like we did with the hair. Another way to do it is to use a constraint. And I find for something like this that it might be a little bit better because we can then animate the teeth if we need to. So if you're posing your character and maybe the teeth aren't exactly the way that you want, you can reposition them. And you can also add in controls to do that if you want. Now I'm just going to make these rigid. We're not going to add in some controls. So let's go ahead and do some constraints. Now, the first constraint will be for the lower teeth. And we want those to rotate along with the jaw. So when that jaw rotates down, those teeth follow exactly along with it. So if I select my joint jaw 1 and shift select my teeth bottom, I can then do a parent constraint. So we want to make sure that we have maintain offset on and click add. So now those teeth follow along. And if I go into the outliner and unhide my geometry by hitting Shift H, you can see this a little bit better. So you can see that now that those teeth move exactly along with the jaw, and that's what we want. Well, let's go ahead and also do the upper teeth. So let's go into wireframe mode here, see if we can select those. There we go. So there's my teeth. Now I want to connect the upper teeth to the skull. So I need to connect it to a joint that doesn't move. So I'm going to select this joint head 2 and then shift select those upper teeth. There we go. And again, constrain parent. So now go back into shaded mode here. Turn on all our lights. You can see that the teeth all move with the head, and then the lower teeth move with the jaw. So now you can see that we're getting good motion for those teeth. Now, if you wanted to, you could attach the teeth using skinning. That's just another way to work, but constraints work just as well. So go ahead and attach the teeth to your skeleton the way that you want, and we'll move on. We now have the hair, eyebrows, and teeth attached, and all that's left to do are the eyes. Now, I'm going to need to create joints for the eyes. I find it's best to use joints when animating the eyes. So we need to create a set of joints for each eye and center those perfectly to each eye and then skin them. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is let's hop into our outliner and let's hide everything but the eyes. So I'm going to go into my geometry group here. Let's select head neutral, hit Control H to hide it. Open up that parts group and select everything but the eyes and hit Control H again to hide those. So I need to create some joints that are connected to these eyes. So let's start off by drawing those, and I'm going to draw them in the side view. So I'm going to turn on my grid. Now you can see that this eye is basically aligned vertically and horizontally, so it's pretty much square to the scene. And I want to make my joint square to the scene as well. So I'm going to select my joint tool here, and I'm going to turn on snap to grid. And then I'm going to draw a short joint that's approximately the length of the eye. In this case, it's about 2 grid points. So you can see that when I move this, it's pretty close, and it can be a little bit longer than the eye if we want. And if you actually want to, you can adjust this by moving that tip a little bit further in. So something like that. Now I need to position this to the eye, but before I do that, let's go ahead and give this a descriptive name. So we're going to call this joint I1 left. We're going to start with the left eye. And then let's just copy and paste that name to the other joint and call that one I2. So now I've got some nice descriptive names. And I need to center this to the eye. Well, I could basically eyeball it, but that's not going to really work. I want this to be as precise as possible. So the way to do this is to use some of your snapping tools, but you need to turn on some grid points so that you can snap to something in the scene. I'm going to select my eye geometry, and then under display, transform display, let's just go local rotation axes. And what that does is it turns on these objects that I can snap to in my scene. So let's select the joint, turn on snap to points, or you can just hold down the letter V, and then I can snap to that exact point, which is now my center. And so I can hit Control D for duplicate that one, and then again hold down the letter V and snap to that icon. Now for this second set of eye joints, I will need to rename them. So instead of I1 left one, it's going to be I1 right and I2 right. So now I've got my joints. And let's go into a shaded mode here. So if I turn on X-ray joints, you can see I've got my joints there, but I need to skin them to the eyes. So let's select our left joints, select the left eye, do skin, bind skin. So now if I rotate the joint, it's moving with the eye. You do the same for the other one. Select that joint, shift select the eye, skin, bind skin. Now, if we go back into our outliner, you'll see that these two joints are outside of our head hierarchy. And so we want to just attach them to this head too. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up that hierarchy here, select my two eyes, and middle click and drag. So now they should move with the head. And if I unhide everything by hitting Shift H, we should have everything attached and ready to go. So now everything moves according to plan. Awesome. So now that we have all of this in place, we can start connecting the character to the actual rig. We now have everything attached, and when I move my main head joint, everything moves along. So everything is attached and ready to rig. So let's go ahead and start rigging. Now, when we rig using basically NURBS curves that we use as control objects. Now, typically I start with NURBS circles just because they're easy, but you can draw whatever shape you want. Now, the first thing we're going to connect is this head joint. Now, when you connect controls to joints, you want to make sure that they are perfectly aligned to those joints. So if I double click on this, make sure I'm in object mode here, you'll see that this particular joint is pointing straight up. So the x-axis is aligned with the joint. So I need to draw something that is aligned along the x-axis. Now we can do this in the side view. So if I go into my side view, you'll see that I'm looking straight down the x-axis. So I'm going to draw a NURBS circle and make it about as big as the character's head. Now the reason I drew this in the side view is pretty apparent right here. Now if I take a look at this and maybe rotate it, you'll see that now, if I rotate this 90 degrees, you'll see that the x-axis is aligned to this object, which is exactly what we want here. So now I have to take this object, my NURBS circle, and let's go ahead and rename that. I'm going to call it Control Head. And I want to align my control with the joint it is going to affect. So we can do that using a constraint. So I'm going to select my joint head 1, Shift select my control, and under constraint, we're going to do a parent constraint. Now I want to open this up and make sure that I leave maintain offset off. We don't want an offset because that will then align everything perfectly. So if I click add, it aligns that control to the joint. So if I select my joint, you can see that X is pointing straight down the joint, and the same for the control. Now my control does have a constraint, and you can see that here in the channel box. So let's go into Windows Outliner and open up that head object, and you'll see there's a constraint. I can now delete it. Now the object will still stay aligned because that's how we positioned it. It is no longer constrained, so now we can animate it. Now that my control is aligned, you'll see that, well, the curve itself isn't aligned. It's not in the perfect position to be a control. Well, we can fix that very easily simply by remodeling the curve. So I'm going to right click over the curve, and let's start by going into hull mode. So that just allows me to select all the control vertices. And so I'm just going to go ahead and move them to a position that's a little bit more rational for this type of control. And I'm actually going to go into my side view here, and let's rotate that so it's fairly flat. And we can continue to model it. I can say scale it a little bit, or I can go into individual control vertices, right click, go into control vertex, and maybe scale these down and maybe move these a little bit so that this looks maybe a little bit more like a guitar pick. But the reason I'm doing this is just so you can kind of see the direction of that object. So now I've got a control that kind of points in the direction of the face, is easy to select, and fairly apparent. Now, once your control is in place, you'll need to connect it into your skeleton and start rigging. So now I have my head control in the scene, and it is perfectly aligned with the joint I want to control. So now we can connect our skeleton to our control. Now we're going to use a feature called Offset Parent Matrix. If you're not familiar with this, it's a new feature in Maya 2020, so you'll need to be using that version or above. And it allows you to do rigging without additional nodes. So let me show you what Offset Parent Matrix is. Now, when we set up a control like this, we want all of these values to be 0. And because this particular control needs to be aligned with the joint, we can't do something like modify freeze transformation, because watch what happens to the alignment of this. The joints get all flipped around. Now I have my XY pointing to the right. I want it to be pointed along the joint. So I'm going to undo this. And this is what we want. We want this aligned perfectly to that joint. So these should be identical. So I can't freeze transformations. Now, typically we would add in additional nodes and zero those out and all that. And that's kind of complex. So let's talk about offset parent matrix. I'm going to select my control, hop over to the attribute editor, and then select control head, which is my first node here. So you can see that all the values that were in my channel box are here under transform attributes. Now I want to zero those out. Well, what Maya does is it gives you an additional node with Maya 2020 called offset parent matrix. And so if I am in the composition tab here, you can see that it's essentially just an additional node. So if I were to say type in the number 2 in translate, watch what happens to my control. It jumps up 2 units, but this value doesn't change. So if I bring this back to 0, that doesn't change. So in other words, this is just a way to offset my node and not mess up my channel box. So all I have to do is copy these values into these nodes, and I should be good. Now I can do that manually by simply highlighting these, copying them, and pasting them. But an easier way to do this is to use the node editor. So I'm going to go into Windows, Node Editor, select my control, add it in, and let's expand this. So what I want to do is I want to copy these values here down here. Now these values are basically this entry here called matrix. So I'm going to go ahead and left click and select and drag that over to this main node here. Select other, and then scroll down until we have offset parent matrix. Now what I'm doing is I'm connecting the matrix to this offset, and when I do, watch what happens to my control. It goes all haywire. And that's because I've essentially copied these values here to here, but I've got double entries now. So I've got basically what's in my normal channel box is now duplicated here, and this connection keeps that live. So the first thing I'm going to do is select that connection and hit delete, but those values are still there. But all we have to do now is just go into our channel box and zero them out. So now there's 0 in the channel box and my control is clean, but if I go into the attribute editor, all those offsets are baked into that offset parent matrix. Very cool. So now that we have this, I've got a clean controller and I can connect it into my skeleton. So I'm going to select my controller, shift select that joint, and I'm going to constrain it. So I want to select the joint last because it's being constrained. And I'm going to do a parent constraint. I want to make sure I do have maintain offset on, and let's go ahead and click add. So now I have a clean controller and it totally controls that joint. So as you can see, offset parent matrix is a great way to create clean controllers that are very simple to rig. Now let's move on to rigging the eyes and the eyelids. We're going to start with eye direction. Now, how you rig eye direction may depend upon how you want to animate the character, but typically the standard is that the eyes are aimed at a target. So let's create a target and then aim the eyes at that target. So we're going to go into, say, a front view here, and I'm just going to draw a NURB circle, not too big, just about the size of the eye, maybe a little bit smaller. And we're going to call that control eye direction left. And then I'm going to hit control D to duplicate, create another one of those, and that'll be control eye direction right. So we're going to want these joints that control the eye. So that would be this joint here that controls the eye. I want that to be pointed at this target. First, we need to align the control to the joint so that it's pointing directly at it. And we can do that by moving the control. Now I'm going to hold down the letter V, and that will snap to vertex. And I want to snap to that joint right there at the front of the eye. Okay? And then I'm going to move that forward a bit, about a head to a head and a half's worth of distance. You want to give it enough distance so that it's not right up against the eye. And let's do the same for the other side. So I'm going to take my right control and again move it and snap it to that joint, and then just move it straight out along Z. And then I'm going to align them by eye here in the side view. So now these are pretty much aligned. And all we have to do now is make the eyes point at them. Now, before we do anything, though, I do want to zero these out. We do want to have our controls zeroed out. So let's go ahead and do a modify, freeze transformations, and that will zero it out. Now, for these, I'm not as concerned about the orientation of these because they're not controlling a joint. It's really just a look at constraint. So let's go ahead and select eye direction left. I'm going to turn on X-ray joints here. I'm going to zoom in and shift select this joint, I1 left, and then do constrain aim. And we want to make sure that maintain offset is clicked on, and then click add. So if I turn off X-ray, you should be able to look at that object. So now when you control eye direction, it will always look at this object. So let's do the other one. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. See if I can get this. I got the second one. I didn't have to use X-ray. Constrain, aim, and there we go. So now this works. And so if I select both of them, I can move the eyes wherever I want or move them individually. So all we've done is we've taken the joint that controls the eye, we've aimed it at a target, and now we can control eye direction. We now have eye direction controls, but we have two separate controls. So if I want to actually move the eyes together, I have to select two objects and animate two objects. And that's not really ideal. It's just one more thing that we need to animate. Now, typically, when we animate the eyes, we will be animating them together. So let's create a master eye control or a gaze control. So I've already drawn a control here. It's this little box called control eyes. And let's go ahead and move that so that it's centered to the two eye controls that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and move it here in the top view so that it's aligned with that center axis and that it's pretty much straight over the eyes. Now I'm going to offset this just a little bit so that you can easily select this from a top or side view. And then I also need to move it down. So now it's pretty much centered. So now with this centered, I do need to freeze transformations, modify, freeze transformations. So now this is zeroed out. So I've got this control, and I want these two here to be a child of that control. And we can do that in the outliner. So I've got my eye left and right direction, so I can middle click and drag them over that eye control. And now when I move this eye control, the gaze follows. And I can then individually offset each one of these eyes by moving the individual control. And then I can, again, use the master control to manipulate the whole rig. So as you can see, we now have a hierarchy. We have our eyes, and then we have a left and right direction. So now with our eye direction in place, we can move on to the eyelids. Now let's rig the character's eyelids. What we're going to do is we're going to take these controls, so control lower lid, lid low, left and right, and upper lid, left and right, and we're going to connect them to the blend shapes that control the lids. So we can find the blend shapes in the channel box, and you see we have an entry here called blend shape. And so the ones we're going to work with are eyes, lower lid, and upper lid, left and right. So you can see that as you move these from 0 to 1, they blink that lid. So the first thing we want to do is take these controls and put them in the same hierarchy as our head control. And the reason we want to do that is because when we move and rotate the head, we want all of those controls to follow along. So we can do that in the outliner. So I've got all of my lids here. And let's go ahead and middle click and drag them. So now they're part of that head. And if I rotate the head, they all move with it. So let's go ahead and position these the way that we want. I'm going to start off in my front view here. And let's go ahead and move them so that, let's see, the right ones are centered. And then select these left ones, move them over a little bit. And we can move these back and forth to position them in front of the character. Now, once I have these in the position that I want, I'll want to freeze transformations. And so now when I select this, you can see that we've got everything is 0. So what I want to do is to take the motion of this. So I want to be able to move this up and down. So in this case, that's translate X for this object. So as I translate this in X up and down, the blink will follow along. Now we can do that connection in the node editor. So I'm going to go into my node editor. And the first thing I'm going to do is just select everything in here and hit this button to clear it out. And then I'm going to select these two controls and let's add those in. I'm going to select these shapes and we can just hit this button to get rid of them. So now I have my lid upper and lower. And then I also need the blend shape because I want these to control the blend shape on this object. Well, the easiest way to do that is to select your mesh, go into the channel box, find that blend shape node and then add that in. Now, a bunch of other stuff gets added in, but we can select all of those objects and then just hit this button to remove them from the node editor. So now that I have this, what I want to do is let's start with the lower lid. So if I open this up, you'll see we have translate. And so as you can see, translate X is really what I want to use to control that blend shape. Now, if we open up the blend shape, you'll see we have an entry here that says weight. And this is where all of our blend shapes live. And so right here, we have our eyes lower lid. And so to connect this, it's actually very, very straightforward. So I want translate X to connect to lower lid A left. So that makes it so when this goes from 0 to 1, this goes from 0 to 1. And fortunately, our character is scaled so that this actually works pretty well straight off the bat. Otherwise, we may have to add kind of a fudge factor by using a multiply node to kind of alter it so that everything moves together. Now I'm going to go ahead and zero this out again. And one of the things we want to do is we do want to limit what the animator can do. So the first thing we need to limit is what the animator can animate. So in this case, we only want the animator to touch translate X. So I'm going to left click and select all of these, right click, lock and hide selected. So now all I can do is translate X. But as you can see, we can still go way out of bounds with this. So if I move this, I can move it to here, but I can also move it way up here, and that's not cool. So let's go ahead and limit the motion of that control. So I'm going to go into my attribute editor for my control, select the main node, the leftmost node, and under limit information for translate, you'll want to translate limit X from, let's say, negative 0.2 on the lower side. And on the upper side, let's do a 1.2. So I want to be able to go a little bit above and below the bounds, but not too much. So in this case, I can bring this down a little bit, bring it up to 1, and then maybe go a little bit further if I need to. But that's completely limited now. So now the control only works in the way that we intend. Now you can certainly adjust the limits as needed, but again, that's just your taste. So as you can see, it's very easy to attach a control to a blend shape in the node editor. We now have our lower lid connected, but we also have to work with the upper lid. Now these are a little bit different. So our lower lid goes from 0 to 1. But our upper lid, we basically want to move that down. So it's going to go from 0 to negative 1. So we're going to have to find a way to flip that around so that it affects the blend shape properly. Well, it's not too hard. So let's go ahead and hop into the node editor. So I'm going to select this lid upper left. Just go into the node editor. And I already have these connected and set up. So hopefully you have the same layout. If not, go ahead and load them up. So this lid upper left, if I took the X translate and did the exact same thing I did with the lower lid and attached it to upper lid left, I would get an effect. But the problem is that the action of this is reversed. So if I move this down, the lid moves up. If I move it up, the lid moves down. And that's not acceptable. So let's flip that around. I'm going to go ahead and delete this connection, and we're going to add in another node. So I'm going to hit the Tab key and type in the word multiply, and we should be able to get multiply double linear. And all this does is it multiplies whatever we plug into it by a value. So I'm going to select Translate X and just connect it to this main node, and I'm going to bring it into input 1. Now, if I double click on this particular node, you'll see that this is highlighted in yellow, and that's because it's being driven by this node. This other node is open. Now, I could connect it to some other attribute, but actually I just need a constant. So I'm just going to type in -1. So this is basically just going to flip the polarity of this around. So instead of going from 0 to 1, it's going to go from 0 to -1. And then I'm going to select the output of this, and let's plug that into our eyes, upper lid left. And that should work. So now, there we go. Now again, with this node, we do want to limit it just like we did with the lower lid. So I'm going to select all of these attributes, lock and hide, and then hop over to the attribute editor. And under limit information translate, we're going to limit x from -1.2 to +0.2. And again, you can set the limits however you want, just depending upon how you want the character animated. So now I've got these lids that will close. And if we want to, we can select both of them and zero them out, and everything goes back to default. So I'm going to leave it to you to set up the right side. And again, it's the exact same process. All you have to do is connect the X translation to the blend shape. And then for the upper lid, you need to add in a multiply node to flip it around by -1. Now let's move on to the lower portion of the face. We're going to work with the jaw, and we're going to rig that to this control. So before we get started, let's go ahead and make sure our control is in the hierarchy and zeroed out. So I'm going to go into Windows Outliner, and you'll see I have my control jaw here. And I want that to be a child of this control, which is my control head. So I'm going to select that, middle click and drag, and make sure that those are all connected. So now when I move my head, those controls move with it. Now this jaw control, I wanted to manipulate some joints. So in my layers panel, I'm going to turn on joints, and let's turn on X-ray joints. So I want this to be controlled by this. So joint jaw 1 is what manipulates my jaw. So if I were to rotate this, you can see I can open the jaw or move it side to side just through basic rotation. Now I could rig this so that this particular control is rotated, and the rotation of the control controls the joint. That seems the most obvious. But the problem with this is that everything else I have on my face, all the other controls, are going to be translational. So we'll be using the move tool, not the rotate tool. So let's set this up so it also uses the move tool and uses translation to control the rotation of this joint. So we can do that in the node editor. But before we do that, I want to select my control jaw, and let's go ahead and position that. So I'm going to move it and hold down the V key, and let's just snap it to this joint right here. So that way I know it's pretty much centered to the face and is positioned appropriately. And then I'm going to do modify freeze transformations. So now let's select this and shift select joint jaw 1 and go into our node editor. Now I'm going to clear that out and add in those new nodes. So the ones we want to work with are control jaw and joint jaw 1. So I'm going to open both of these up. And what is it that we need to do? Well, this node here is for my control jaw. So I want to move that up and down along the x-axis. And then I want that to control rotation along z for that joint. Well, we could literally just wire it together and see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and take translate X for my control object and plug it into rotate Z from my joint. And notice how it adds in a unit conversion, and that's fine because we're moving from rotation to translation. But let's select that jaw and move it. You can see that it's working, but man, it's way too slow. So I need to multiply this motion by a significant amount in order to get this to move one-on-one with my control. And we can do that using a multiply node. So I'm going to type in tab, M-U-L-T, and we're going to find multiply double linear. And that's what we're going to use to multiply this value by something that will increase it. So I'm going to go ahead and take translate X, plug it into multiply double linear, connect it to input 1. I'm going to break this connection here for the unit conversion, take the output of the double linear multiply, and plug that in to input. And then let's just double click on this node. You can see that this particular node has 2 inputs. The yellow one is coming from the controller. That other one can come from a controller, but we could also just type in a constant. So let's just type in a number like 10 and see what happens. So I select this, move it up and down, and now I'm getting something that's a little bit better, but it seems like the jaw can move a little bit faster. So I'm going to keep this selected, go back over to this multiply double linear, and instead of 10, let's do 15. And so now, that's pretty good. If I want to, I could probably bring it up just a little bit. Maybe let's go to 18. So again, this is just fine-tuning the action of the controller, and you can basically type in whatever number you feel is correct. But typically, I want this to move at a 1-to-1 ratio. So when this moves down, 1 unit, that the jaw moves down essentially 1 unit as well. So I'm thinking 16 or 17 might be the good number here. Now we can do the exact same thing for the left and right. So I'm going to go back into my node editor. And for this, I want to move this control left and right on Z. So translate Z. We're going to add in another multiply double linear. So translate Z goes into input 1. Double click on this. Let's use the same multiplier, 16. And then this plugs into rotation along Y. So that goes into rotation Y. And now that goes left and right. Awesome. That goes up and down. And it pretty much follows along. Now you can play with the multipliers a little bit more to get maybe a little bit better action. But as you can see, a multiplier is a great way to get precise action on a control. With the jaw rigged, we can now move on to the mouth and lip controls. Now there's going to be quite a few controls, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we have. I've drawn in most of these. Now most of these are just nerve circles. So we have upper lip controls for right, center, and left, as well as lower lip controls for the same. Now these will simply control those blend shapes we created that manipulate that small portion of the lips. Now we also have this control called control mouth left. And this will control things such as smile and frown, as well as expanding the lips either left and right. So going from a wide grin to a pursed lip. So basically this will be able to move in 2 dimensions, up and down and left and right. These will move just vertically. Now I've got these controls created and named, but we do need to put them into the hierarchy. So let's go into Outliner. So these 3 controls here for the upper lip and the mouth control should be attached to the head itself. So I'm going to middle click and drag those over the head in the outliner. So now when I move my head, they all move with it. These lower ones here should move with the jaw. So when the jaw moves up and down, these will go with it. So let's open up the hierarchy here under control head. You'll see we have our jaw. So let's select these 3 lip controls, middle click over the jaw. So now, if I move the jaw, they go with it. Now we have one more control to create. Now the reason I left that behind is because we want to create it so that it moves in an opposite direction to this. Now before we do anything else, I do want to freeze my transforms. So I'm selecting all of these. Let's do modify, freeze transforms. And so now all of these should be 0. Now this control here for the mouth, we are going to move it left and right and up and down. But I want the other control to mirror this. So we can do that fairly easily by duplicating this control and then flipping it around. Now my vertical axis in this particular situation is X. So I'm going to rotate it 180 in X. And then move that over so that it's positioned where the other one is positioned, so somewhere around there. Now, when I do this, by flipping it around 180, it gives me this effect. So if I select both of them by shift selecting, go into my move tool, make sure I'm in object orientation, I can now move these in and out with one motion. And that's because I never froze transforms on this second one. So if I were to do a freeze transformations, watch what happens to the axes of this object. They flip around. And so now if I move things, they're kind of moving the same direction. That's not really what I want. I want it to be opposite. So I'm going to undo this. And I have this 180 in here, but I can leave that here because what I'm animating is only translation. So rotation doesn't need to be animated, so we can leave it at 180. But I still want to zero out this transform. And I can do that by going into freeze transforms and just clicking off rotate. So when I do that, everything is zeroed out but rotate, but these values will be hid when I actually go to finish up the rig. So I will go ahead and lock and hide all of those values, so we won't even see them when we animate. So when you create controls, you do need to pay attention to how the animator will be working. You want to make controls that operate in a way that makes it easier for the animator to do his or her job. Now let's go ahead and rig the lip controls. So we have these three controls on the top and bottom lips, and they will be controlling the corresponding blend shapes on this object. So if I go into the blend shape here in the channel box, you'll see we have lips, upper and lower corners, as well as upper and lower center. So for example, upper corner left would be this one, upper corner right would be the opposite one. So these ones here will be controlled by these values. Now I want these controllers basically to move up and down, so I'm going to move them along the x-axis. So let's do this in the attribute editor. So let's go ahead and do the top lips first. So I'm going to shift select these three and then select the blend shape on that geometry. Go into Windows Node Editor. Let's go ahead and clear all that out and just add in those nodes we want. So I've got a couple here that I probably don't need. So I've got this is my geometry. So I'm going to select all my controls here, move them over, and select my blend shape. And then select all these and just remove them from the node editor. Got my lip upper right, center, and left. And then I've got my blend shape. Now, if you notice here, under weight is where all of these need to go. So we could literally just connect these directly. So let's start with the right side. Remember, we're working with translate X. And I want that to be connected to upper corner right. So when I do that, I can move it and it will affect that shape. But the problem with this is that this is moving a lot faster than the shape. So I need to basically multiply this so that they pretty much move together. So it's a little bit more interactive. And we can do that using a multiply. Now, one of the things that we have here is we've got three objects. And so instead of just doing these one at a time, I'm going to create a node that will do all three. So I'm going to hit Tab and let's type in multiply. And we have this one here called multiply divide. Now it's very similar to the multiply double linear that we worked with, but it's got more inputs and more outputs. So for input, I'm going to do right, center, and left as X, Y, and Z. So my translate X on right goes into input 1X. My translate X of center goes into Y. And my translate X of left goes into Z. And now I need to multiply these by a value. Well, we can do that by creating a constant. So I'm going to hit Tab again and type in constant, and we want to find float constant. the output of this, I want it to go into X, Y, and Z. And this will contain the actual value for the multiplier. So in order for this to work, all of these need to be connected to the other side. So I'm going to connect the output of this. X is going to go to the right shape, upper corner right. Y is going to go to upper center. And Z is going to go to upper corner left. So now let's go ahead and select this and move it. And so what I want to do is create the constant that multiplies this. So basically we're multiplying all of these by whatever number is in here. In this case, it defaults to 1, but I want it to be more. So maybe 2. We can do a little bit more than that. Let's try 4. There we go. Okay, so 4 looks actually pretty good. So now this multiplies by that one. This one moves the same. And this one moves the same. So now I've got all of these, and they're all manipulating these equally. So now I can zero these out, and I can lock and hide everything but translate X to finish off the rigging. Now let's rig the lower lip controls. The process is going to be almost identical to that for the upper lip, except our constant may be different. So let's go into our node editor and let's clear it out. I'm going to go ahead and select each one of these nodes, add them in, select the shape nodes. Let's go ahead and get rid of those. And then let's select the head, select the blend shape on the head, and add that in as well. And then we can go ahead and hide these. So all I need to do is connect this basically the same way we did before, except there's a little bit of a twist. And that's because these controls don't go in a positive direction. They go in a negative direction. So we need to make our constant negative. So this should be a pretty good little refresher here. So all we want to do is add in a node called a multiply divide node. So that has 3 inputs, so we can do all 3 at once. And then it also has 3 outputs. So let's go ahead and connect in our controls. So my lip lower right, I'm going to connect translate X into input 1X. The center control, again, translate X, but this time into Y. And again, translate X into Z. And then I need a constant. So I'm going to hit tab, type in the word constant. We need a float constant. And the output of that goes into all 3 of the second input. And so this constant will need to change. At this point, it was 1, but remember, our controls are flipped, so this needs to be a negative number. Now, in the previous video, we had -4 as the multiplier, so let's start with that. And then let's hook everything up and see how it works. So I'm going to open up my weights here on my blend shape. So X is right, lower corner right. Y is center, lower center. Z is left, lower corner left. So now, let's see what we got. So I take that, move it down. Notice how this is actually moving a little too fast. So my constant works. I mean, the fact that it's negative, that works, but we need to redial in that constant. So let's go ahead and double click on our constant. And so instead of say -4, let's try -2. And again, select that. That's a little bit better. So as you can see, the constant for one side of the lip may not work for the other side simply because of the way things are modeled. So now that we have all of this in place and all of these controls are working, we can lock and hide all the values that we don't need. So in this case, we're going to lock and hide everything but translate X on all of these. So now all I can do is move this up and down. So go ahead and dial in your constants and lock and hide unnecessary attributes. With the lip controls in place, we can now work on the broader mouth shapes, and those would be smile, frown, and so on. Now, these will be manipulated by these controllers, and these will be able to move in multiple axes. So what we want for this is when we move this up along X, we want it to smile, frown, and then we want the lips to either widen or purse depending upon how we move it in Z. So we're moving this along basically the X and the Z axis. So let's zero this out and let's start attaching this. Now this is going to be a little bit different because we are going to have a few more nodes to control this. So I'm going to go into my node editor and clear it out. And then I'm going to select my face here and select this blend shape node, add that in. Let's go ahead and hide all this superfluous stuff. So I just want blend shape 1, and then select my control and add that in. And again, we can remove the shape node. So all I've got is control mouth left and my blend shape. So what we want is we want the X, that's our up and down in this particular orientation. So we want X positive to control smile, and we want X negative to control frown. So we need to have an additional node that is basically a conditional node. We need to make a decision as to whether this is above or below 0. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit Tab and type in the word condition. And let's bring in that node and open it up. Now, this particular node actually works on RGB, but we can certainly plug X, Y, and Z into it. Now, if I double click on this, it will basically give me a first term, a second term, and then whether this is equal, not equal, greater than, and so on. So let's go ahead and set this to greater than, and then we'll go ahead and work with it. So I want my translate X, which is up and down, to go into my first term. So when this is greater than the second term, which in this case is 0, we have a true condition. So what's the color if it's true? Well, it's just going to be the value of that controller. So color if true, let's just call this red. And then that output can control the shape. So let's organize this so we can see it. So the shape that we want to control is smile left. So output red controls smile left. And there we go. So when we go up, it controls smile left. When we go down, notice how it snaps. Now the reason it's snapping is because it's not greater than 0. And we have this color if false, and that defaults to 1. Well, we want that to default to 0. So now goes up and down. Now, the one thing I'm noticing is that the action of the slider is moving a little bit faster than the shape itself. So let's go ahead and add in one more node, and that would be a multiply node. So I'm going to hit Tab, and let's find a multiply divide node. And again, that is a 3-axis node. So instead of RG and B, it works on X, Y, and Z. So let's go ahead and plug that into X. We'll take the output of X and plug that into smile. Double click on this node. And you'll see that here we have our value that's coming from our controller. So let's go ahead and multiply that by a multiplier. Let's say 1.5. So now when this goes up, that's pretty close. So now it basically is just multiplying that by 1.5. So it moves a little bit more accurately to the controller. So now when this is below 0, we have a completely separate condition. So if we go back to our condition, we could say if it's below 0, we can have a false color. And that's actually going to be the same number here. So color if false, but we're going to plug that into green. And then the green value is going to be plugged into my multiply divide. And instead of multiplying by 1.5, I'm going to multiply it by negative 1.5. In other words, we're going to flip this around because this value is actually going negative, but we want it to actually control the blend shape in a positive fashion. So I'm going to take the output of Y and put it into frown left. So now, up and down, and there we go. So as you can see, by using a conditional, we can alternate between positive and negative on a controller. Now let's rig up the second half of our mouth controller. If you recall, we've got X already wired up so it controls smile and frown. So now we need to wire up Z so that it widens or narrows the mouth. So I'm going to go into my node editor, and I already have these nodes up. So you may get this. If not, go ahead and reload your controller and your blend shape. And all we need to do is essentially duplicate this network for the other side. So this is going to be translate Z, and we're still going to use basically the same node. So I'm going to hit Tab, type in condition. I'm going to add in a condition node to determine if we're above or below 0. So if I double click on this, I want this to be greater than. And then my first term is going to be Z, which it should light up here. And then my color, if true, let's go ahead and use the red channel for that. So if it's false, I want that to be 0. And then the output color of that, we're going to run it through a multiply divide node. So I'm going to hit Tab. And again, let's type in multiply and find the multiply divide node. And then in input 1, let's use the X channel for this particular portion of the control. So input X, and let's multiply it by 1 just for now. We can always change this if it's not lining up. And so the output of X is going to be, go into lips wide left. So now that should go. Now again, it's not quite following that exactly the way that we want. So let's go to our multiply node. Let's say maybe 1.5. That looks a little bit better. So in this case, 1.5 seems to work. Okay, great. Now let's wire up the other side. So again, we're going to use translate Z. So if it's not greater than 0, the color is going to go to G. So color if false, G will be this color. And then we're going to take that G, we'll input it into our multiply divide. Now, if it's less than 0, we need to flip that around. So I'm going to type in -1 for right now. And then the output of Y is going to go to lips purse L. So now when this goes below 0, you can see it starts to purse those lips. But again, this is moving a little bit too far. So let's go ahead and give that a little bit more oomph. So we will add maybe 1.5 to that. And so now it multiplies by -1.5, and we get something that's fairly close to what we want. So now as I move it, that corner of that mouth pretty much matches my controller. Now I can certainly play with my values a little bit more, but as you can see, this is pretty much set in place. So I'm going to go ahead and zero out my controllers. And now once I have this, it makes good sense to lock and hide everything else that you don't want to use. So I'm going to select translate Y, lock and hide. Let's select all the rotates and scales and lock and hide those as well. So all we have left is translate X and Z. Now we can do that for all the other controls as well, and that's a great way to clean up your rig. So go ahead and do that, and then do the exact same operations for the opposite side. Now, when you do this side of the mouth, you have to remember that your translate Z is flipped. So you want to flip the lips wide and the lips purse when you actually get to connecting those shapes in. So just flip those around and it should work with those particular controls. Our rig is starting to shape up, but let me show you some additional rigging techniques that you can use in your facial rigs. Now, one of the main rigging techniques that we really haven't touched on is constraints. So let me show you how to use constraints to control the cheeks. Now, if you remember, we set up the cheeks using some joints. So if I go into my layers panel here and turn on the joints, you'll see we have all of these joints, some of which are kind of right on the surface of the face. And if I turn on wireframe on shaded and maybe select this one here, which is joint cheek left, I can move that around and manipulate the cheek. Now, how much it manipulates the cheek really just depends on how you painted the weights. So if you need more or less, you can certainly just repaint those weights and adjust it as needed. But regardless of that, let me show you how to add a control to it. So I'm going to turn off wireframe and let's go ahead and create a control and attach it. So my favorite control to use is the NURBS circle. So let's do NURBS primitives circle. It's about that big. So let's draw one just slightly bigger and let's give it a name. I'm going to call it control cheek left. And this control needs to be part of the hierarchy that is control head. So let me go into our outliner, select control cheek left, middle click and drag it into that hierarchy. So now it's in there and it will move along with the head. So now let's position this control and wire it up. So the easiest way to position it is to use snap. So I'm going to hold down the letter V on my keyboard and snap to vertex, but I'm actually going to snap to the center of that joint. And then I'm just going to move this a little bit further forward because I don't want this kind of buried in the skin of the character. I want it a little bit ahead of that. And once we have it positioned exactly where we want, we can freeze transformation. So I'm going to go modify, freeze transformations, make sure everything is 0. And now we can do a constraint. So I'm going to select my control first, my joint second, constrain, point constraint, and make sure that we have maintain offset checked on. Click add. Now, if I select that, you can see that it affects the cheek. And there we go. So now one of the things about this particular control is that it's kind of wild and free. And by that, I mean I can pull it way off to one side or the other, and I really don't want to do that. Now, in my attribute editor, I can go over to Control Cheek L, which is my main node, and under Limit Information, we can start to limit this. So you can see here, I'm moving it in Z. So if it gets much beyond 1 or so, it's probably going to be too much. So I'm going to limit it to 1 on that Z side. So now I can't go any further than that. On this side, maybe negative 0.75 or something around there. And then we can certainly zero that out. And we can do the same vertically. So maybe somewhere around, maybe about 1. I'll give the animator some freedom here. So 1 in X here, and then down. Again, we can give it 1 on that down. So now I can't move that beyond a certain value. So I can always zero those out. And then also we can puff the cheeks out or push them in. So for puffing out, this is maybe 0.9. Again, let's just give it 1, give the animator some freedom. And then for pushing in, I don't really want to push in much beyond, say, 0.75 or something like that. So again, these values are really up to you as to how much you want to limit that control. But again, all we have to do now is zero those out, and we have control over the cheek, and we can play with that control. Now, this particular control won't rotate or scale, so let's go ahead and select all of these and do a lock and hide selected. Now, you can do the exact same thing for the opposite side of the face and create a cheek right control. So go ahead and do that. Now let's set up the eyebrows using constraints. I've created some controls right here, and if we look at them in the outliner, you'll see we have control brow, which is just this arc or this NURBS curve here, and then an inner, a middle, and an outer control as well. So I want all of these to kind of move at once. So I want to be able to lift or lower the brows and then individually use these to shape the brows. So let's go ahead and set up our hierarchy, and then we'll connect everything up to the brow joints that we created earlier. So the first thing I want to do is I want to select these 3 circles and middle click and drag them over the brow control. So now when I move this, those all move with it. And then we want to place that into the head hierarchy. So right there. So now it's all part of the head. And so when I move the head, everything moves with it. So now let's go through this and start to freeze transformations. So we're going to do modify freeze transformations for the brow control. And then I can select each one of these as well and freeze them all at once. So now hopefully we've got all of these are now zeroed out and we can connect them. So in my layers panel under joints, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the joints that we have. And you can see I have these joints here around the brow. And if I move those, you can see it basically moves the brow. So what I want to do is basically just constrain each control to its corresponding joint. So let's select the control, shift select the joint, constrain point, make sure maintain offset is on, add, select the control. It may be easier to do this in the outliner. So select the control, shift select the joint, point constraint, control, joint, point constraint. And that should be it. So now let me turn on wireframe unshaded so you can see this. When I lift this up, the brows go with it. And a little bit of the skin moves with it as well. Now, one of the things about this is that we still have a pretty wide range of movement, but for the brows, we kind of want to just move them up and down. So in this case, we're moving them along X. So I'm just going to hide and lock or lock and hide all the other ones. So now I can only animate the brows going up. And now if I want a different shape for the brows, I can certainly use these. And again, I may want to limit that action like I did for the cheek. So if I go into the attribute editor, select my main node here, under translate, I may want to limit this motion so that each of these will only move the brow so much. But as you can see, we've got a pretty nice little control here. We can lift and raise the brows all at once, or we can pose the corners of the brow however we want. Now, once your rig is finalized, you will want to do some organization. Now, one of the first things you want to do is make sure that all of your layers are correct. So when I turn this rig on or off, none of these controls are left behind. So if you don't have a control that's in the rig, you can always select it, right click, add selected objects. Then you also want to do the same for geometry. You want to make sure that all of your geometry layers are in place. And then all of your shapes and joints can be hidden as well. Now, for the final rig, you can ultimately get rid of the blend shapes because they are baked into the rig. But I do like to keep them in my master file because it does allow me to go back and tweak shapes if I need to do that. But once you get into animation, you don't want these hanging around, so you probably delete them in the actual working file. Now, in addition to this, we should go through the outliner, make sure that everything is organized here. So again, I have a group for my geometry. I also have a group for my control. So my control for my eyes are separate from the control for my head, which means that I can actually move these around. Now, another nice thing to do is to color code your controls. I've done a little bit of this, and as you can see, we've got red on the right, green in the center, B on the left. So basically RGB as you look at the scene. So I've done most of these, but I left behind a few of these so I can show you how this works. So all you have to do is select your control, go into the attribute editor, and then in the shape node, we have under object display, we have a rollout called drawing overrides. Just enable overrides and dial in the color. Now, typically, I like to use slightly muted colors because they don't detract from the scene. So instead of a bright red, I use kind of a muted red, and that gives me the information I want without distracting me from the actual rig itself. So I can do the left side of the character, and again, I can make it kind of a blue color here. And this last one here. Now, if you're really smart, you probably would write a script that does this, but we're doing it manually. So now everything is pretty much organized. That color is off. There we go. And there we have our proper color. So go ahead and organize the rig and make sure that it's in a place where animators can work with it. Now, hopefully, your rig is in place and everything works according to plan. But of course, we always need to test to make sure that is the case. So, one of the things I like to do is I like to do some animation or just basically play with the rig to make sure that all of the controls work and that everything moves as intended. Now, you could certainly select a line of dialogue and animate the character speaking or something like that, but you can also just go through and do some basic motion of the character. You can animate the head, for example. You can take the eyes and move them around just to make sure that everything is working. You can certainly do some posing of your character. So if you wanted to, you could maybe pose the eyes up here, maybe rotate the head a little bit, and then maybe even start playing with posing the eyes. And as you can see, as I start to work with this, it is working the way it is intended. And so we can, again, play with the mouth, play with the jaw. And we could also create a multiple poses and animate between them if needed. So everything seems to be working pretty well in the rig, and you can certainly add more controls if you want. But hopefully all of these techniques will be able to be used for whatever sort of rig that you want. Well, that just about does it for this course. I hope you learned a lot about rigging characters in Maya. And if you want to learn more about Maya rigging, we have a lot of other courses that cover all sorts of topics from skeletal rigging to creature rigging and more. So until next time, I'm George Maestri.